Bernard-Henri Lévy, why is war both the correct response and the correct word?
War is the correct word because it is a war which has been declared to civilization, to democracies by ISIS. They chose the war, they decided the war, and they are waging the war all over the world. In France, in Bamako, in Tel Aviv in a way, because the stabbings in Tel Aviv are not so different, it is a war. And I don't see how we can react, us democracies, in another way than by responding to war. And a war not only at the periphery, but at the core. All this comes from Syria and Iraq, as you know. It is in Syria and Iraq that you have the training camps, the centers of command, the weapons which are coming from. I cannot see how we can get rid of this plague without hitting ISIS at the head.
And so what does that mean in practical terms? Because President Hollande has declared war, effectively. But as you point out, it is not just France that is the victim of their aggression. So what do you think is the future? Some sort of grand coalition?
First of all, I must say that I feel, as a French, a certain loneliness. I don't think that France is supported today as it was last January or as America was after September 11. There are some European treaties who imply and suppose a much stronger solidarity than the one I feel and hear. Mr. Obama, President Obama, was so strange in his press conference in Turkey. I did not feel from his part either the sort of support which we could wait and expect. I don't know what is happening. Is Mr. Obama struck by a sort of Oslo syndrome? Oslo syndrome, I mean, this Peace Nobel Prize, which is maybe a sort of curse on him. But I don't see the strong reply and the strong support which the situation would need. Now, what it could mean concretely to reply to this war, first of all, to help the Kurds in Iraq and the Kurds in Syria. They are the boots on the ground. They are very valiant and brave soldiers, and they are winning, by the way, each time they confront ISIS. Battle of Kirkuk in August, Battle of Sinjar a few days ago, they win. ISIS is weak in front of the Kurds. These terrorists who are very strong when they behead some innocents, they are very weak and maybe coward when they are in front of the valiant Kurds. So, number one, help the Kurds and help with more ammunitions and more military devices. And maybe number two, increase us French, you Brits and the Americans, increase the number of special forces we already have on the ground. It does not need a big military operation. It is not the war, opposite to what Mr. Obama seems to believe, it is not a war in Iraq again. I'm pretty convinced that Daesh, for the moment, is a fake state, a puppet state, a tiger of paper and a paper tiger, and that a very limited operation should be enough to get rid of this true cancer.
Well, what makes you so sure that you do not need a large ground force? Even if you degrade the IS infrastructure in Syria and Iraq, surely you still need the presence of forces to make them run away. That's what happened during the last Iraq war. It's what happened in the invasion of Afghanistan. If there is no large ground force, what is to stop them just staying there?
Staying where? Staying in Iraq and in Syria?
Yes.
I think that the Sunni tribes in Iraq at least, and maybe in Syria, are already fed up of this iron order which they impose. You have to know that Sinjar city was an empty city when the Kurds entered in. You must know that the city of Tal Afar, which is probably the next target of the Kurds, is a ghost city. Mosul, the great city of Mosul, the Nineveh of the Bible, is an empty and a ghost city. I mean by that even the Sunnis, even the inhabitants of these places, they don't want the order of Daesh. This criminal order which implies so many body penalties and punishment, they don't want that. So I don't think that neither on military grounds nor on political aspects we have to face a new Hitler. We knew, English and French and Americans, we knew in our history very difficult situation where we had to face a very hard adversary. Nazism was a big adversary. Communism was, in another way, a big adversary. Daesh, compared to this, is really nearly neglectable. Very harmful, of course, because Daesh hits anywhere, anytime, in an imprevisible way, but the core of it is a very weak core, militarily and politically.
But it is also something that evolves and changes with time. IS followed Al-Qaeda. As we talk today, IS may be in Iraq and Syria, but there is Islamism all over the world, whether it is across Africa, whether it is Al-Shabaab, whether it is in Afghanistan or elsewhere in the world. So if this is a war, is it just a war with ISIS, or is it a war with Islamism across the globe? Where do you stop?
It is certainly not a war against Islam. It is a war inside Islam, between radical Islamism and moderate democratic Islam. It is a war inside Islam. The only war of civilization, to use the very bad word of Samuel Huntington, the only war of civilization is a war inside the Islamic world between the democratic civilization and the neo-fascist civilization which is incarnated by the jihadism. So this is a real war, and it is true that it spreads all over the world and that the front line is nearly everywhere. But this is not a reason to do nothing. This is not a reason to declare, to ask appeasement to these sort of people. This is not a reason to appear feeble and weak. So there is today one of the centers of this center of command of this war, which is ISIS. It is doable. It is at our reach. In France, the enemy is invisible, impossible to detect, or in England yesterday. In Syria and Iraq, it is visible. It is detectable. They are vulnerable. So let's start by this, by helping the valiant Kurds, by giving them the ammunition and the weapons they don't have, and by supporting them by very limited boots on the ground. Because, no boots on the ground there will mean necessarily more blood on the ground here in Paris, in London, or in New York.
Won't there be more blood on the ground here regardless if you go to war? it will invite more attacks, won't it? It will invite people who sympathize across the world to hit back. That's what history tells us. We seem to be going around in circles a little. After 9/11, George Bush declared a war on terror. There was the invasion of Afghanistan. There was the invasion of Iraq. Every time there is an invasion against what is defined as terror, the terror just moves somewhere else. This is a world war, in fact, isn't it?
It is a world war attack. That's just what I told you. But the fact to seek appeasement does not give tranquility. It is not, because if I understand well what you said, you are saying that if we reply to the violence by a limited strength, we will have more violence. I don't believe that. I think it is the opposite. Look at France. France was against the war in Iraq. France did not participate in the war in Iraq. France was at the forehead of the liberation of Libya from a dictatorship. And nevertheless, France is hit today, last week, in such a savage and terrible way. So there is no correlation between us democracies being proud of our values and being attacked. We can be ashamed of ourselves. We can try to negotiate with the barbarians. We will have the same sort of attacks if it is easy for them to do, if they think that we are an easy target, if they have some sleeping cells available. It will not change. Let's stop with this absurd logic, which consists in saying, let's try to speak with these people. Let's try to be good guys with them, and maybe we will have the peace. France did that for many years. A few years ago, it never prevented the attacks. It never prevented terrorism. This is a shameful and inefficient logic. When there is a war which is declared, you know that in United Kingdom, when there is a war which is declared, remember Churchill, you take you face it, and you face it as wisely as possible, with as much cold blood as possible, but you face it.
But that's what I'm saying to you, really, about the use of ground forces. If you are facing this war, why is everybody, from President Obama to David Cameron to President Hollande, constantly saying no ground forces? What kind of message does that send? You know, isn't that the truth as to why you feel lonely? The reason you feel lonely is because every world leader is terrified of committing ground forces to a war they don't feel confident they can win.
Because they overestimate the strength of ISIS. There is a sort of very strange exaggeration of the strength of ISIS. The evilness, of course, but the strength, no. You remember 1 year ago, we said, and you said, you guys, journalists, and you are right, that ISIS did take and seize all the arsenal of the Iraqi armies, heavy tank, cannons, tanks, and so on. Where are they? Where are they? I'm back from Kurdistan, from the front line in Kurdistan. They use only antediluvian suicide lorries. I did not see any tank. I did not see any sophisticated cannon. Why? Because the airstrikes have already destroyed or paralyzed these heavy weapons. In Sinjar, you did not see them. Around Mosul, they are not. They have been destroyed or stuck in the ground. So it is not this huge and fierce and ferocious army which our leaders seem to fear. I remember 20 years ago at the time of the Bosnian War, the war in Sarajevo. It was the same. Mr. John Major in England, Mr. Mitterrand in France, they said, be careful. In order to save Sarajevo, you will need a huge operation on the ground. You will need 100,000 of people. And that's why they hesitated so long. It was absurd. The situation was solved and Sarajevo was saved just by a few very precise and surgical operations. We are in a similar situation today. We are making a huge mountain of the strength of ISIS, who is in reality a tiger of paper.
Bernard-Henri Lévy, thank you very much indeed.